What do you think that these executives are afraid you're going to do to white America?
Probably stop some racism.
Stop racism?
Yeah. I'm probably afraid of that, because then people don't hate each other, and people start talking to each other, and then they start talking to each other, they find out who's the problem.
Which is?
Greedy people.
Greedy people. I have a couple things I want to ask you there. Do you really think that some of the guys that you dealt with at NBC, no names, right? Because there's lawsuits for that too, that some of these guys really want to promote racism actively, or is it a subconscious?
I just think it's part of capitalism, is to promote racism, right? In order to make things work. If you feel better because you're white and you can get a job, you use that. I mean, I would.
Absolutely.
Say, I'm sorry, Jack, but shit, they say I'm white. I'm going to use this.
Right. Absolutely.
Get this job. I'm hungry, But, and that separates people. So they keep people separated, and that keeps them from thinking about the real problem. That's as simple as I see it.
One of the God MCs right there, the OG Richard Pryor, breaking down a little bit of race and capitalism analysis for us all. Welcome to Stir Crazy, everybody. This is episode 54. If I got that right, I don't. 55. It's going to be a long, hot summer, kids. I'm your host, Kim Brown. We have a whole lot to get into, including looking really hard at the cases of two Black men who were found hanged days apart, miles apart in California. Now that Los Angeles County coroner says that police jumped the gun by ruling that there was no foul play. In fact, he is walking back entirely the ruling of suicide in the case of Robert Fuller. We're going to get into that. Also, something interesting coming out of Los Angeles, I'm sure you've heard about, maybe not a whole lot about, the active duty member of the military, the Air Force sergeant, who has been now charged with 2 counts of murder when it comes to the killing of 2 law enforcement officers in California. Did I mention that he was a white supremacist? I'm sure Bill Barr is looking all into it while he's searching for Antifa in the daytime with a flashlight. We'll talk about that as well. Plus, we're always here for your comments, your chats, your criticisms in the comments. You all can do that. Plus, feel free to email us, stircrazy@therealnews.com. Now it's time to bring in our fantastic panel. As always, we have a nice collection of voices to join us here today, all the way from North Carolina. Taure Brown, he's a sociologist, is in the house. Don Rojas, he is our political editor here at The Real News. And Marcus Ferrell, political consultant, joining us from today, parts unknown, somewhere in the South. Gentlemen, we appreciate y'all being here today.
Thank you.
Well, first and foremost, gang, we need to start with a bit of breaking news off the top in case you have not heard. The police officer who was fired from the Atlanta Police Department for the shooting death of Rayshard Brooks has now been charged with murder. That announcement coming today from Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard, saying that Garrett Rolfe, who was fired after killing 27-year-old Rayshard Brooks, will now face criminal charges along with a second officer who was present on the scene. His name is Devin Brosnan, now faces 3 charges of aggravated assault for standing or stepping on Rayshard Brooks' shoulder after he had been shot. Just absolutely stunning. And Marcus Ferrell, obviously we're talking about your hometown, Atlanta, Georgia, which I'm sure has been absolutely crazy, and the streets have been on fire for the past several days. Give us an update of what's been happening in Atlanta, and what is your take on today's announcement that Garrett Rolfe will now face murder charges for killing Rayshard Brooks?
And listen, Atlanta has turned into, as you were saying earlier, like the epicenter of everything that is going on, and it kind of left Minnesota. And I think a lot of the unfortunate incident that happened with Rayshard is just sad. We went from having 1 or 2 protests a day in Atlanta to basically having 6 protests a day. The jury is out on how Keisha Lance Bottoms, our mayor, is treating this situation. And we're going to be honest. It's a very angry city, and there's not going to be any end to protest in the near future. I keep hearing folks say that, you know, the energy is waning, but not in Atlanta, Georgia. In Atlanta, Georgia, is just getting started. And there's independent protests in different parts of the city, which I find the most interesting thing is folks are organizing themselves. And also there's like NAACP and Black Lives Matter protests. So, I mean, at some point, the resources of the police department that's still left there is going to be stretched so thin because so many people are upset in this town, and they are rightfully upset. And also they realize that, you know, none of this stuff around us is ours and everything is against us. Atlanta's still a black city, and you're going to have repercussions if cops keep shooting black people.
Marcus, what are the streets calling for in Atlanta? We know Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms released a platform of reforms and changes that she wanted to the Atlanta Police Department to make immediately.
That's right.
You know, all sticking to the kind of same neoliberal script of reforming policing, banning chokeholds, passing a duty to intervene by other law enforcement officers if they happen to see excessive force or deadly force being used. What do the streets say that they want to come from the mayor and from APD?
You know what's funny when you say that? In the streets, defund the police is the moderate response, right? The streets, that's the moderate response. That's like the safe response. At the end of the day, the streets want to abolish the police department. The organizers and the people out there are like, you know, fuck the police in NWA terms, right? And can we see why yet? I mean, in the midst of one of the largest uprisings of black and white people in this country, these cops showed no remorse and shot a brother who they could have ended up sending home. They could have sat there with them. They could have done so many other things besides, you know, forcibly detain him. And when the guy could have walked home. So everybody's talking about that aspect. It's amazing that non-apolitical people are now the most engaged people that you will ever see in these streets. And you're starting to see people who normally wouldn't show up to a protest or normally wouldn't show up to a political action are the ones that they're leading the protest. They're making the signs, right? So what they're saying in the streets is straight up defund the police and abolish the motherfucker. Excuse my language.
Sorry. So now this is the second, hopefully in a longer list to come, of high profile instances where police have killed unarmed black people. While I can't say that Mr. Brooks was unarmed, he had a taser, but at the same time he was running away and was shot in the back for falling asleep at the wheel at a drive-through. Not an executable offense by any means, but regardless, now this is two instances with Mr. Brooks and Mr. Floyd initially in Minneapolis where the police have been charged with murder. But I don't really take a whole lot of comfort in that because the criminal justice system we know is always working on the side of the police. What do you think will be the outcome should either of these cops, and let's even throw in the father and son duo who murdered Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, let's throw them all in there too. What happens if these folks walk for these murders?
I think, you know, if they walk for the murders, then I think the cities, and I think you'll see the spontaneous rebellion increase even. I don't even want to put it into words, but I mean, even if they are tried and convicted and sent to prison, I mean, that's not a idea of justice for me. As an abolitionist, I don't see these institutions being able to offer justice at any point, right? The real justice for Ahmaud Arbery, for Breonna, for all the other people who were murdered by police and just been murdered by white supremacist violence is to get rid of the systems and institutions that empower people to kill these folks, right? So if we can get rid of the police, then that's one of the main ways you stop police violence. They don't exist anymore. And I think when those institutions no longer can harm people, then that's when justice exists. So again, I don't get any kind of satisfaction by seeing the police get arrested or go to prison. I mean, there's a deeper conversation about what should happen to these people. But as far as what justice looks like, there is no justice within this criminal justice system. And that's just the bare bones facts for me.
Don, I wanted to get your take on the announcement of these new charges. And after that, we're going to play a clip from Congressman James Clyburn from South Carolina about this entire issue. But Don, first, let me get your reaction.
Well, it seems that the charges handed down today were predicted in a way. The district attorney in Atlanta did project, I think, on CNN on Sunday that he was looking at 3 categories of possible charges. And he did say that the first charge would be felony murder. That's how he described it. And it seems that that's what he has announced today. So he has stuck to his word, so to speak. But, as this whole process plays itself out, one thing that we need to keep in mind so that we understand all of this in proper historical perspective is that the police departments in major cities across this country, like Atlanta, like New York, like Los Angeles, like Houston, like Baltimore, are essentially occupation armies. They are the occupation armies of an unjust, racist, neoliberal order. And this neoliberal order has feasted on racialized capitalism, which is what we live through today, for several decades. And the consequence of that is huge disparities and inequalities, social and economic, that have risen up in the last 40 years, as well as a new emboldened ultra right-wing, neo-Nazi, fascist, very reactionary movement has also grown up as a consequence of these neoliberal attitudes and strategies. So we have to focus our attention in this debate as to whether police be defunded or not, is to look at alternatives to the current policing system in the United States, to the current policing culture. Alternatives that speak to how do you preserve and defend the rights, the democratic rights of all people, particularly people of color, without having to resort to a regime of perpetual racialized violence. So those who are leading the movements against the institutionalized racism in the police departments all over the country should also begin to imagine an alternative to policing in America as it is today. And I believe you are beginning to see some of that happen in Seattle, in the occupied zone that they have set up there. Trump keeps threatening to send in the National Guard to break it up if the local police and the local mayor can't do anything about it. So I just think that this is important that we focus on these recent developments, but we should also focus on the broader historical context within which these things take place.
Well, that's, part of the problem is that some of our elected leaders, most of them at least, seem to do just that, ignore the historical context, and truly they lack imagination or even a desire to pursue the educational opportunities that have been widely disseminated about what comes after the abolition of police and prisons. And I wanted to take a listen real quick to the number 2 Democrat in the House of Representatives, James Clyburn. This was a few days ago that he spoke on MSNBC with Craig Melvin. And Craig Melvin had asked him, whether or not he supported reallocating funds away from the police and more towards social programs that benefit the community as a whole in spite of policing. And this is what James Clyburn had to say.
I am against defund. I do not like that word. The word means what it is. And, I don't have a problem with words like that. Look it up in the dictionary. What does it mean? So if you are talking about reforming the police, then you and I are together. Look, Skip Holbrook, who was our chief here in Columbia, is a good police officer. He runs a good department. In fact, he has now been called upon to help fashion, I think there are 3 mayors and 3 police chiefs. He's one of the police chiefs, and now going to be fashioning some new approach to policing. People recognize him as a good cop. So what I'm all for is us taking a hard look at our practices and have reforms where we need them. We need the police. We want the police. They have a role to play. And so let's not get so carried away that we allow sloganeering to hijack this movement. That's what happened to us back in the 60s. John Lewis and I never struck any matches, never threw any rocks. But Burn, Baby Burn became the headline. And that's what the people use as an excuse to reject any kind of, I would say to resist any kind of change. So I don't want us to allow sloganeering to cause people of goodwill to resist making the changes that we need to make. So yes, reallocate resources, reform policing, no to defund the police.
Which one of y'all was sniggling? Is that Marcus? You back there sniggling at our conversation?
Come on. This is the man responsible for Joe Biden, okay? Yeah. Getting where he is.
This is the same guy who said Joe Biden is an honorary black man, right? So he gave him that card without my personal permission, by the way, right? Because he should have ran that one by me. It's hard to respond to it because, I mean, I'm sure the congressman from South Carolina would be more than able to go back to his days when he was doing civil unrest. And there was a older generation of black people saying, well, I don't understand what the big deal is. I mean, people forget that Martin Luther King was negatively viewed before he died by most of the black community. So it's unrealistic for him to say defund the police is bad because he himself didn't come up with it, right? And the irony about all this is that we are always asking how to turn out more young black voters, right? We are always asking how we're going to have the talking points. And when they give it to us, people like James Clyburn was like, no, you can't say that. So it's almost like we want your ideas, but we don't really want you talking. And he just needs to kind of sit down somewhere. I mean, this ain't his fight. He just needs to sit down. Like, bro, sit down. The young people got this. They know what they want, right? So, yeah, it's
Marcus, I would say that he wants their votes, but he doesn't want their ideas. You know,
that's right.
He can't handle the ideas. The ideas are too radical for him. I mean, he's all his life been a centrist Democrat. That's how he made a name for himself. He rose up through the ranks of the Democratic Party, and he's seen as a so-called sober-minded person within the Democratic Party. I don't really anticipate anything even quasi-radical coming out of his mouth, really. But he has a lot of power. I mean, look at what he did to resuscitate the campaign of Joe Biden. And he's got, Joe Biden has got a debt to pay to him, but that's between the two of them. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Well, yeah, but Mr. Clyburn and Joe Biden and President Trump, for that matter, all their reform ideas seem to overlap, which should really tell the Democrats something. If y'all are on the same page or even to the right of Trump when it comes to so-called reformations for the police, then you're really not reading the room, Taure. And that's really the big problem that we have with the establishment Democrats as a whole. But I think with what a lot of younger, more left-leaning or leftist Black folks have with our own elected leadership, it's like y'all are not reading the room. Like y'all are looking at these thousands of people in the streets, but you are not seriously taking into consideration what the streets are calling for.
Yeah, I mean, Clyburn just represents what Glenn Ford talks about, the Black misleadership class, right? He's, or even to go back further, from Glenn Ford, if you're talking about E. Franklin Frazier, a black sociologist, wrote this book called The Black Bourgeoisie. And in it, really, he talks about how this class, this black political class, has to serve kind of two masters. They have to serve the black populace as being their spokesman. So they have to kind of somewhat speak to our needs, but at the same time serve the ruling elite by being this kind of spokesman. So they're always in this hypocritical game of saying, I'm for the people, but then you're actually working for the man. So Clyburn, I mean, he's saying when he says the police have a role to play, he does. He means that they have a role to play as far as the ruling class. Their job is to protect the property and interest of the ruling capitalist class. And that's what they do. And Clyburn works for that class. That's where his material benefits come from. And he serves that class. So when he's saying, yeah, my class of people need these police. And it just shows who they really speak to. And as far as Joe Biden and everybody else, Joe Biden has mostly always been to the right of even Republicans when we're talking about crime and punishment. I put on my Twitter just a few weeks ago a video from him in 1989 where he attacks George Bush's war on drug bill from the right. He says that they needed to triple the police funding specifically for drug users, and he used the word violent thugs, and he said that we need more police to lock them up, more prosecutors and judges to convict them, and then more prisons to put them in jail. Right? And this is 1989, him attacking them from the right, and he's continued in that legacy from now. So I wouldn't be surprised, or I'm not surprised to see that he's still on the same trajectory that he's always been on, and Clyburn's going to always be on that same trajectory as well, because they work for the same people.
Marcus,
can I add one thing? I think it's very. Listen, Sister AOC said something amazing. She said, somebody asked her, well, what does defunding the police look like? And I believe the sister responded with, it looks like the suburb, right? It looks like it looks like where neighborhoods where they don't have a lot of police and they take all their funding and they put it in the community. It's pretty simple what defunding the police looks like. And for Clyburn to not, and y'all have to be careful because this is going to get me kicked out of the CBC gala, the Phoenix Awards, right? But for Clyburn to say that right there shows that they literally have not been, he hasn't been to a protest yet. There's no way he would have been to any protest out here, and you're supposed to be our leader. You went to a protest. If you went to any protest, including ones in Columbia, South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, where I am right now, Aiken, South Carolina, like all over the place where they're trying to tear down these monuments, you don't hear them talking about, we need police. We want police. We need police. We don't want no damn police. They don't want no damn police. They want to get rid of them. They want to put that money into their communities. I mean, we can start scholarships with that money. I mean, do you know how much money goes into it? All that money could be used to actually help our communities. Hell, we can even start talking about the R word. Reparations.
Create a reparations fund and put the money into the reparations fund. Put the police money into a reparations fund. No, but I just want to quickly respond to a point that Brother Taure made when he talked about the bourgeoisie, the black bourgeoisie. In the global South, during the times of colonialism, where countries in the Caribbean, Latin America, Africa were colonies of either Britain or France or Spain or Holland, the colonial masters built up a class that was known as the comprador bourgeoisie, right? In each of those colonized countries, there was a comprador bourgeoisie. In other words, the localized equivalent of the neoliberal politicians that you have today. And after the independence came about, after the national liberation movements kicked out the imperial rulers and established their own state, their own independent sovereign state, this comprador bourgeoisie morphed into the local ruling class in each of those countries. I just wanted to throw that out because this phenomenon that we are witnessing here in the United States, to a greater or lesser degree, has happened or is continuing to happen in the global South.
Yeah.
Gang, I wanted to ask, and I wanted to start with Marcus, because you're the political strategist, political consultant. You got you in this, to win this. And Taure, you coming from the academic part of this, and Don, you just been all over in terms of reporting and observing and bringing to the masses
and living through
information.
some of this stuff, living
That's
through
right.
a revolution in Grenada, and facing the ire of Yankee imperialist weaponry in the form of the U.S. military that invaded tiny Grenada. That's a whole other story.
But we know that Grenada was dangerous to the U.S. They were afraid that they would awaken the Black American sleeping giant, so to speak.
Exactly.
And Grenada, it was particularly dangerous because they were English speaking. It wasn't. It would be in a language that Black Americans could 100% understand and receive. But that, like you said, that's a whole nother discussion. Maybe we will get into Grenada one day. But gentlemen, I mean, how do we win right now? Because we got them on the ropes. I really feel that. I feel the politicians are scared, Black, white alike. I even think that, Trump, whatever you want to make of his new executive order, which we do have a clip of, he gives some details about what he's doing, but it's all kind of the same rigmarole that the rest of the politicians are suggesting. But how do we win this moment? Because they are afraid. And my concern is that, I mean, should we just concede the White House this time around? Before everybody starts throwing shit, I know what Trump is. I get that. But at the same time, these wins are going to come at the local and possibly even the state level way more quicker than it'll come from the White House, even if Joe Biden does become the new elected president. Marcus, let me start with you. How do we win right now?
All right, we got to do two things. First, the moderates need to go ahead and just use the free talking points that are given to them right now. And the free talking points aren't coming from a millionaire Washington, D.C. consultant that just wants to get another contract. He doesn't even, that consultant has no earthly idea what the hell is going on right now. That consultant is the person that's in the president's ear and is in Tom Perez's ear the most, right? The person who is usually like, well, we just need to figure out how we can talk to white moderate women in the Midwest. That's out the picture. If you want to see anywhere close to Obama 2008 turnout numbers, the first thing you need to do is listen to the free talking points that the young people in the streets are giving you. The second thing we need to do, and this is more intricate, is get ready to run someone to the left of Joe Biden into 2024. Because whoever he chooses will probably be very, 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 very moderate and very neoliberal. But what I don't see right now is progressive organization doing something that they should have done. And I bring this up all the time, but they need to be down here in Charleston, South Carolina right now. They need to be down here in Atlanta, Georgia right now. We need a prominent Black face that's a progressive to run against or Latinx face to run against Biden in 2024. That's how we ultimately win, if we build relationships within the Black community and if the moderates decide to go ahead and finally listen to talking points that are free.
Taure, I'd like to get your take on this. How do we win this moment and beyond? If we were to look retrospectively back and understand that the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, I mean, it was protracted, especially relative to, the patience level of younger generations right now. I mean, it was a, 10-year plus struggle until we got to 64, 65 to get something actually happening on the federal level. But from your perspective, from where you sit, how do we maximize this and win this from a policy perspective, even locally, especially locally?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a tough question to ask a sociologist or even just somebody who is as cynical as me as far as winning. In my case, is always about the abolition of the U.S. empire. So that's maybe a little dangerous to say, but that's where I'm at with far as really winning. But if we're looking at this specific moment and if we're taking an issue or a social problem like police violence, we win by at least agreeing, like most folks do, whether you consider yourself liberal or all the way far to the radical left or however they want to describe people like myself, that most people can agree that we need to defund the police and move those resources into community programs. While at the same time, and I think Don kind of touched on this, is that we need to consider and build alternative institutions that can meet people's needs as they see fit. Now that a lot of folks think about when we're just talking about defunding the police and moving these resources over, we're thinking about just moving them over to social services and moving them over to some other programs, but not realizing that these programs in themselves also carry a set of contradictions and can often be violent and harmful towards poor and Black working class folks. So even those institutions in themselves and how they operate need to be reimagined and applied. So we really win this moment by getting organized, like joining organizations who are doing these kind of works as far as building alternatives, pushing politicians to the left as far as defunding the police and getting those resources available for those programs. And then we also really win by politically educating ourselves, which organizations should be doing, but folks can also do that work for themselves, reading books, connecting with one another, discussing these kind of ideas. That's how I think we really get towards the process of moving. But organization is key. Power, like Kwame Ture tells us, that power comes from the organized masses. And we have to think about what vehicles we're going to use as far as how we're going to organize ourselves.
I think maybe this is something interesting that I wanted to present to the panel. I'm not sure if y'all heard this or read this. Common Dreams reported that California Democratic Congresswoman Barbara Lee has made a proposal to the Congress proposing up to $350 billion in cuts to the Pentagon budget. She proposes closing U.S. military bases around the world, ending ongoing conflicts, scrapping weapons programs, and eliminating Donald Trump's Space Force. Sounds like a good idea. She went on to say, quote, redundant nuclear weapons, off the books spending accounts, and endless wars in the Middle East do not keep us safe, especially in a time when families across the country are struggling to pay the bills, including more than 16,000 military families on food stamps. We need to take a hard look at every dollar and reinvest in people. It is time to cut weapons of war and prioritize the well-being of our troops, anti-poverty programs, public health initiatives, and diplomacy. Now, Marcus, I'm not sure if you had heard of this proposal by Barbara Lee, and I'm not 100% sure whether or not the CBC has backed her on this, but this is the sort of more radical legislation that we would definitely love to see coming from all lawmakers, but especially Black lawmakers, because it is our communities who are underfunded and disinvested in the most. So $350 billion was probably a drop in the bucket in terms of, making the Black community whole. But damn, it would be a great start. What is your take on her proposal? And will she get support from other Black legislators or so-called progressive legislators?
Ain't no goddamn way in hell the CBC supported that. Are you serious? They wouldn't support that for a million miles. But you know what else they didn't support? They supported that she didn't? The Iraq War. My viewpoint, when that woman says something over there in California, we all shut the fuck up and listen to it. That's what I think. I think we always listen to Barbara Lee every time she opens her mouth, because she was right about the most disastrous war in American history besides the Vietnam War. And she also just makes common sense. That's the kind of leadership. She proved every other congressperson wrong about the Iraq War. And if this woman asks us to defund the military and use it for our economy, and instead of instigating wars and problems all over the nation, then maybe we should listen to her. So does the CBC back her? I doubt the CBC backs her because, they make money off the American war machine.
Yeah. I want to echo what Marcus just said about Barbara Lee. I've known her for a long time. I have a lot of respect for her. She is a woman of principle. She is a person of courage. It took a lot of courage for her to be the only member of Congress to vote against the Vietnam War. It took a lot of courage for her to be the only one to vote against the neo-fascist Patriot Act. And so she has had a long history of putting her mouth where her ideas are. And the only thing I could say about this most recent proposal of hers is that the amount is way too low. Right. But I mean, $350 million out of the Pentagon budget of, I don't know, a couple $1 trillion or whatever it is, 800 billion, sorry, seems to me to be a little on the low side. But the idea itself has merit. Whether the CBC, Congressional Black Caucus, will support her, well, that's to be seen. I have my doubts. The CBC is not a politically monolithic entity. You've got from the right to the left and everything in between represented among the members of the Congressional Black Caucus. So I don't know how much support she will get, but it is a concrete idea that she's put forward, and I believe it deserves support in principle. With some criticisms that I would throw in terms of the size, etc. That's
exactly
that's
about the size. Totally,
Yeah.
because we know the war in Iraq that initially began by let's say W's war in Iraq cost $2 trillion. That amount of money was enough to address most of America's infrastructure deficiencies, our educational programs, our social services. All that went to fucking up Iraq. Way to go, Bush and Congress who supported them. Tori, I'm gonna let you comment on what Congresswoman Lee has suggested. It's really, she's trying to defund the big cop gang, and organizers on the streets are trying to defund the smaller cop gang.
Yeah, and both cop gangs run the same hustle, right? They destabilize places so they can siphon off resources and exploit labor. That's what they do. And that's what the U.S. military does all across the world. They're politically destabilizing countries, and then that allows for multinational corporations to come in, take your natural resources, and do all those things. This is kind of imperialism 101. I am very happy to see that Barbara Lee is at least taking the bare minimum as far as saying all this money you're spending towards this needs to shift. And I think that's where Bernie Sanders really fell short in his campaign. Like, if he really pushed it as far as every time somebody asked him, well, how are you going to pay for this? I would have just started reading off the United States military budget every single time, or defense budget, or the Pentagon, right? So do I think that the CBC is going to back it? Hell no, right? Because most of their major funders are those same people who are getting high off the hog by U.S. imperialism. But at least, and I'm happy that Barbara Lee at least has the courage, as she's kind of exhibited throughout her career, to do this. And I hope that at least the newer kind of folks who may take these folks' place will at least kind of adopt the same method of looking like, we need to shift resources away from these people. But at the same time, as we're looking at resources being shifted back into the United States to the empire itself, we also need to think about how we need to get resources to the countries that the United States has helped destabilize, right? And how do we allow those folks to use that money for self-determination? I think about Haiti specifically. Right? United States folks have been on the ground in Haiti. Literally struggling against Joel Movis and this administration that was pretty much put in by the United States. So countries like that, and there's a long list of countries in the global South we can look at where the United States has destabilized, and we need to be thinking about them in conversations about reparations for U.S. imperialism. Right. So I just wanted to put that out there too.
Yeah. One concrete thing that they can all do is I said I'm talking about the captains of global finance capital, World Bank, IMF, etc., is to forgive the foreign debt of the global South, which amounts to hundreds of billions of dollars. If they were to take just that one concession, the value there is enormous. Yeah, and that's, by the way, one of the many demands in the reparations 10-point plan. Which I would recommend that everybody who's listening, if they're interested in the issue of reparations and going beyond the slogan, but really understanding the logic behind it, the historical imperative of it. Check it out. There's a thing called the Online Reparations Resource Center. It's at ibw21.org, and it's a great read. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
And on top of that, as much natural and people resources have been extracted from a lot of the countries in the global South over the past 500 years, debt. The fact that Europe or any international bank will have the audacity to say that these countries owe them anything when it's their resources who have been exploited, their people who have been murdered by the millions, and their environment that has been raped to shit, come on now. Anyway, I don't have patience for that right now because other people make me so mad.
It's obscene, really. It's vulgar.
It is truly obscene. Well, gang, another obscenity that comes along with American policing is the fact that even from the top down, the Attorney General of the Department of Justice, Bill Barr, weeks ago said that he was looking into far left Antifa elements in the protests and uprisings that came out of the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Now, the police unions were also pissed, saying that, now that they're targets, they're vulnerable, they're this, they're that. There was a couple of cops who were ambushed and murdered in California. And it turns out the perpetrator was not only active duty military, but also at least seeming to have some affiliation with white supremacists, which, of course, is no surprise to anybody who reads about who are the groups most likely to commit acts of violence against police. It is white supremacists and people who feel as if we are on the brink of a race war. Well, authorities in California today announced charges against that individual, but I want y'all to hear the police describe about what all this person did. His last name is Carrillo. I think his name is Eric Carrillo, the alleged murderer of these cops. Listen to the antics in the adventure he went on when they finally caught up to him, because after he had shot and killed allegedly a guard at the Oakland courthouse in California, he got away. And when the cops caught up with him, check out what happened.
Complaint unsealed today alleges that the van discovered in Ben Lomond on June 6th is the van that was used in the shooting in Oakland on May 29th. Evidence from the Ben Lomond van led Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office deputies to Carrillo's home in Ben Lomond. And as the deputies approached Carrillo's home, Carrillo is alleged to have fired on them, killing one deputy and injuring another. After allegedly ambushing the deputies, Carrillo fled, first on foot and later by carjacking. Carrillo was eventually taken into local custody.
The complaint contains photographs of a white van that parked at the intersection across from the guard post. It says 30-year-old Robert Justice of Millbrae was the driver.
A man later identified as Justice got out of the van and walked around the area for approximately 10 minutes, in a way suggesting that he was conducting surveillance.
The complaint says after 17 minutes, the van pulled into the intersection and the 32-year-old Stephen Carrillo, an active duty Air Force police officer from Travis Air Force Base, slid the back door open and fired what's called a ghost gun, parts purchased separately and assembled from scratch.
The firearm used in these crimes was a privately made firearm with no markings or serial number. This firearm is a machine gun which had a silencer attached to its barrel.
Federal agents also confirmed today the same van and gun were part of the ambush that killed Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Deputy Damon Gutzweiler on June 6th. The complaint says Carrillo's ballistic vest he had that day bore this patch, a symbol of the Boogaloo movement.
The Boogaloo term is used by extremists to reference a violent uprising or impending civil war in the United States.
The complaint contains this photo alleging that Carrillo wrote "Boog" in blood on the hood of a car before his arrest, and some of the movement's sayings, including "Stop the duopoly" and "I became unreasonable." The complaint says Carrillo and Justice met on Facebook, and that the morning of the attack, Carrillo commented, "Go to the riots and support our cause. Show them the real targets. Use their anger to fuel our fire. Think outside the box. We have mobs of angry people to use to our advantage." The FBI says the men used the protests in Oakland that night as cover for their killing. Agents are studying this video from Sky 7 that may show the van shortly before the attack.
There is no evidence that these men had any intention to join the demonstration in Oakland, as some in the media have asked. They came to Oakland to kill cops.
Taure, this is what a lot of protesters were saying in cities all across the country as the protests were reaching their zenith, as thousands were in the streets, and then shit started burning, and, politicians started finger wagging like, y'all better not tear shit up. Y'all gonna make us look bad, this, that, and the third. And then we have incidents where white supremacists are shooting at and killing police under the guise of the Black Lives Matter protests. Well, I have a lot of questions, but I want to get your thoughts because I saw the gentleman, Mr. Carrillo, who was, accused of these murders. And I'm like, yeah, he had to have met his accomplice on Facebook for sure, because I don't know what the white supremacist club version is of passing the paper bag test. But Mr. Carrillo looked a little bit on the brown side to be rolling with the white supremacists. That's just my take. But Taure, what are your thoughts about how law enforcement really misses the forest for the trees when it comes to the elements that are truly violent and dangerous, especially to them within American society?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're. I mean, I think they're part of the forest, right? I think that a large number of those folks still, like I've said before on the show, that they work in concert with each other. Now, there seems to be some kind of element of groups developing who have that, anti-government kind of stance, and they're, the government is basically holding up their right to this race war and to their prosperity of this white country, right? And they're willing to kill police who represent the state. It means to justify what they're trying to do. I don't really know much about that. And I don't have information. I don't follow those kind of folks. When I see those kind of things, I think about, look, Black folks and poor folks and whoever else who's marginalized in society. We need to figure out ways to organize self-defense for ourselves and figure out how to arm ourselves. I mean, if folks are be able to buy these parts online to create ghost guns, there's even folks now who are making guns via 3D printers and all other kind of shit. We have to find a way to protect ourselves because we can't rely on the police to protect us because they can't even protect their damn selves.
Right.
So, and their job is not to protect us. Their actually job is to brutalize us and terrorize us. So whenever I see these things, I'm thinking about, well, damn, how can I keep me and my people safe by any means necessary? So that's what I think about when I see these kind of stories or hear about these kind of stories.
Marcus, this guy is active duty military. Like he's a sergeant right now, or at least was in the Air Force, and was working as military police at a nearby military installation from where he started his killing of law enforcement officers at the Oakland courthouse. What is your? I mean, I saw the story, and all I could hear was Bill Barr's words in my head, rambling on about these dangerous far left elements, Antifa, this, that, and the third, when clearly it's the far right, which is no secret, but I don't understand why the far right white supremacists keep catching the cops slipping. Don't y'all know that they're the ones who want to shoot them?
That's right. First, he's a military, active duty military. I was too. And PTSD is a real thing, especially within people who are active duty military. And you don't have to go to Iraq to get PTSD. All you got to do is do a couple of shifts and have somebody do some training with you, and you can mess around and get PTSD from that. So you got people who join the military. There are a lot of them that need therapy in general. I mean, we all know that the FBI put out some data a couple of years ago, basically saying the rising amount of far left and far right supremacists, white supremacists that were going to be in the police departments around the nation. What they want to do, and I'm pretty sure they were pretty pissed off when they found out that it wasn't a black person that killed these cops. It was a white person. But they don't want to take a realistic look at this. The reason why they don't want to take a realistic look at this is because they have to figure out some way to media spin black pain. They don't want to. They don't want to accept black pain just being black pain by itself, and we could possibly have outside agitators, which we know. I mean, look, the Wendy's in Atlanta was burned by a white lady, and they're looking for her right now. And brothers were literally recording this, this sort of psychotic movement, and he said, "What? They're going to blame us for this because they do want to blame us for this. They want to figure out how they can scare white women in the Midwest to make sure that they either continue to vote for Trump or blame African Americans for things that have nothing to do with them, but just so they can maintain supremacy in the airwaves." And we're just not, and now we're figuring out that narrative can be easily debunked.
Don, tell me about the role that the media plays in this, because as events are unfolding really quickly. I'm thinking in the immediate days surrounding George Floyd's murder. The media really didn't have a grip on things. They themselves were being targeted and harassed and shot at really by the cops. I could probably think of 10 instances of journalists who were targeted for either pepper balls or rubber bullets or some sort of projectiles from police. But at the same time, when there's violence, when there's vandalism, when there's destruction, these acts are automatically linked to the people who are in the streets advocating for their freedom and for the given issue of the moment. How do the mainstream and just journalism at large sort of fall down on the job when these sort of instances happen, when cops are killed in the midst of protests, but killed by those who are using the protest as cover and who have no interest of aligning themselves with protestors?
Right. Well, unfortunately, I certainly have not seen enough reports coming out of the mainstream media that focus on the role of the right-wing provocateurs that have infiltrated the street protests. I believe that they have begun to do property damage and that kind of thing from the first night of the Indianapolis uprising, and we've seen a similar pattern in cities across the country. So I'm not surprised that there will be quite a large number of provocateurs, neo-Nazi types, who have been marching along or cruising around in their cars or in their vans, just sort of waiting for the opportunity to make the protesters look bad, And unfortunately, the media's propensity is always to report the sensational. The fires, the attacks by the police, etc. All which is newsworthy. Don't get me wrong, but that sort of excites the media in a way that prevents them from also probing deeply into the underlying causes of all of this. In other words, again, back to the historical context, which is very important, to a structural analysis of why is this happening, why is this supposed to happen, etc. That is lacking, with the exception, of course, of some progressive and some left-wing media that tries to sort of go behind the headlines and dig deeper. For the most part, bourgeois media, mainstream media's coverage has been focused more on the sensational and not on the interpretation, which is, I think, you can't have one without the other.
Gang, the last story I'd like us to touch on before we wrap is the story of the two Black men who have been discovered hanged in California in separate incidents. One named Robert Fuller, the other named Malcolm Harsh, both found in the Antelope Valley section of LA County. I believe Mr. Fuller was found in Palmdale. Mr. Harsh was found in Victorville, outside of the city library. Police initially ruled no foul play in either incident. And in the case of Malcolm Harsh, he was the older of the two. He was found May 31st. They're still saying no foul play. However, the LA County coroner, in regards to Mr. Fuller's hanging death, is now walking back the initial assessment of suicide and is calling for a more robust and vigorous investigation. Clearly, the families of these two men are devastated and heartbroken. And we have a clip actually from Robert Fuller's sister, who articulates her family's doubt about her brother taking his own life. Let's hear from her.
It's really crazy to all of us. And we really are here to support Robert, and we really want to find out the truth of what really happened. Yeah. Robert was a good little brother to us. And it's like everything that they've been telling us has not been right. We've been hearing one thing, then we hear another. Right. And we just want to know the truth. We're sitting here staring at this tree. It don't make no sense. That's right. No. My brother is tall. Okay. My brother was not suicidal.
Come on, there it is.
He wasn't.
Commit suicide.
My brother was just with me not too long ago, and my brother was a survivor. He was out here in this. He loved Antelope Valley, and he was out here all the time doing what he did best. He was a survivor. He knew how to get around.
That was Diamond Alexander, the sister of Robert Fuller. That video courtesy of Josie Hong. Panel, you know, the optics of a black man hanging from a tree obviously evokes a lot of feelings of lynching, without a doubt. Not to say that black men do not commit suicide, but I think it is the manner of which these deaths have been presented as a suicide, or rather no foul play, at least according to cops, that has people most troubled. Also, the LA Times did a very interesting piece today about the long racist history of Antelope Valley section of LA County, which where both of these incidents happened. I mean, the Antelope Valley Police Department was under federal consent decree by the Department of Justice during the Obama administration for harassing Black low-income tenants with the housing authority, telling them that they had to try to evict them out of homes when they had paid their rent. I mean, just a lot of interesting racist incidents, but a long, long history of it. I Googled Antelope Valley racist history earlier. I'm like, oh, this is how they get down in Antelope Valley. You know, Marcus, do Black people have to start making disclaimers like on social media? Like, if you find me dead, I did not kill myself. What is your take about these two brothers found hanged, close proximity, and not that far in days apart, rather?
If you find me dead, I did not kill myself. Now, I need to just go ahead and say that right now, not joking. My thoughts are simple. It was murder. The moment, how they died, the irony that this happened in California, there was also a brother in Texas that was found hung. This is coordinated. I believe it's from the police department. I believe it has something to do with police officers. For us to trust that we can just automatically say that it wasn't that it was self-inflicted and it wasn't a murder. I mean, if you think about it, down in Brunswick, Georgia, they also said the same thing about Ahmaud Arbery initially, until, you know, the pressure was put on and all of a sudden it became a full-fledged murder, right? So, I mean, we can't trust the police. We can't trust the industry that is currently under scrutiny to bring us justice, and to bring justice to the people that might actually be doing bad things to us. Right now, they're not looking out for Black men. Right now, I believe the police departments across the nation are at the highest level of danger because, you know, when you go out, you tend to kick the hardest, right? And I believe that that's what the industry is doing right now. I believe the police departments are doing that right now, where they are, okay, we'll show you for holding us accountable. We'll kill all of you guys before you hold us accountable. And whether that's on camera or snatching somebody up from their home. And this is not even a tinfoil hat theory. I believe I'm more right than I am even possibly being wrong, just because of the, you know, character and anecdotal evidence that's going on in America right now.
And
I think Marcus is right.
The history.
I mean, I don't have any theories about it, but certainly looks like a lynching. It doesn't look like suicide or an accident. It has all the hallmarks of a lynching. And who knows? It could very well be, neo-Nazis on their own, or neo-Nazis within the police departments are over there. I mean, either way, it's possible, but it certainly doesn't look like suicide to me.
Yeah. It reminds me of 2014, a case of a young brother named Lennon Lacey in Bladenboro, North Carolina, 2014. So this is 2014. He was found hung from a swing set, I believe. And the police ruled his murder a suicide, even though his family obviously does not believe it was a suicide. They believe he was murdered. They believe he was murdered actually because he was dating a white girl at the time. I can look, I mean, if we're even looking in the prison system, we can look at countless times where they say folks commit suicide where we know or can definitely feel that it wasn't the case. But what I think police do is they find a story that allows them to say, oh, this happened. And then they just continue, they run with that story, whether it's believable or not, because they can do whatever they want to because they're the police. I think about so many cases of folks who were quote unquote committed suicide in the back of the police cars while they were handcuffed. I think about Victor White III, Jesus Huerta Victor White was in Louisiana. Jesus was in Durham, North Carolina. So I can think of a lot of cases just like that, where it starts with this one story and they just duplicate it over and over and over again. But so I'm thankful at least that people have recognized this story, and it looks like folks will be able to kind of push to get some clarity around the situation. But I feel sad for all the folks like Lynn and Lacey and the other people, especially living in rural areas, who don't have the mass organizations or media behind them to kind of push those cases to the forefront. They kind of get lost behind the local power in these small places, and their stories get buried, for the end of time. So I think this, again, is a continuation of a long legacy that we can see. And I'm just glad at this point, during this moment, that we have at least a consciousness enough to say, oh, we don't trust what the police saying. So I'm glad that at least exists. And I hope that, folks continue to have that kind of outlook.
What do y'all think the reaction would be? Because obviously, unfortunately, journalists are trained to stick with mostly the official account coming from the police, from City Hall, from the governor's mansion, et cetera. Police said, is usually how it's reported. But, if journalists could report with courageousness and I guess even confidence, I guess, for lack of legal liability, about reporting these as they are, like these are lynchings. People are being snatched from where they are and hung from trees. They're being, that's right, dogs. This shit's crazy. They're being, murdered and hung. And the police are allowing it to happen, possibly even in it themselves. What would the response from the public be? Do you think Black people would arm themselves in new ways? Is that why, there used to be, I think, a pride element in terms of claiming responsibility for when a Black person was hung, and who did it, right? But obviously, these white supremacists try to move in more surreptitious ways these days, and they are not about to take responsibility for a murder, as it were. But what would the reaction from the public be if we were to just completely disregard how the police have categorized these hangings and take them for what on face value what they appear to be, and that is lynching?
I went to Stoddard's gun range. I'm a gun owner. I am a click clack, don't run up on me with that nonsense Black man, right? And if anything ever happens to me, I didn't start it. That person did. And what I found out from one of the managers at Stoddard's is he said the uptick of middle class, upper to middle class African American couples buying first time weapons has went up 275% in the city of Atlanta. What does that mean? And this is in the past 3 weeks. So what does that mean? That means that even some of the most well-meaning folks aren't taking this lying down, right? African American gun ownership is increasing. The number of members in NAGA, National Association of National African American Gun Owners Association, is increasing. And to be honest with you, this is not for a race war. This is not to attack. This is not to attack white folks. This is not to attack. This is literally the gun ownership is becoming an issue of protection in all of our neighborhoods. So we don't have to. I don't think we honestly have to wait to see what all of these murders are doing. People are organically saying, "Okay, I'd much rather get judged by 12 than carried by 6," and that's my motto.
Come through. Taure and Don, I'd like to give y'all a chance to respond before we say goodbye.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick back up. So, I mean, I had I think in whenever the Charleston murders were at the time, I had my dog is really getting on my nerves right now. But I started a viral, I guess, a hashtag called "We Will Shoot Back," and it went viral at the time. But it really kind of showed that consciousness about folks saying, like, Black folks recognizing that we have the ability to defend ourselves and arm ourselves, and that we need to kind of get organized to do those things. So definitely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't disagree with the brothers here, but this is a good opportunity for, particularly for younger people who are motivated to go out and protest racist policing, to begin to read and study a little bit about the history of the Black Panther Party back in the 70s and 80s. There's a lot of instructive material there about what gave rise to the Black Panther Party, very similar objective conditions as we're seeing today, and how that formation became quite an influential force in the African American community across the country. And of course, it was started out in the West Coast in Oakland, California, but then it spread to almost every major city in the country. So it'll be useful to just go back and take a look at the history of the Black Panther Party. And also, this is a good time to pull out Brother Malcolm's book, and read the autobiography of Malcolm X and Blood in My Eyes, those kinds of classics for activists that came out, a couple generations ago. I think it would be good for the young activists to familiarize themselves with the ideas in those histories.
2 comments really quick, and then we'll say goodbye. Eagle Hawk Condor in the comment said, "My uncle is a judge, Kim Brown," and some in the chat may laugh, but he put a disclaimer on Facebook yesterday, and I didn't get it until that story for real. He also went on to say, he said, "I am not suicidal and have no desire to end my life in any form." I was like, what the fuck is going on? Why would my uncle say that? He's saying that because people is popping up dead random as hell. And Black Magic with the final thought, she says, or they say, "Trees are once again bearing strange fruit." Gang, that's our show. We appreciate y'all watching, checking us out on YouTube, on Periscope. I'd like to thank our panel. Great guests as always, Taure Brown, Marcus Ferrell, and Don Rojas. Appreciate y'all brothers stopping through today.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Click clack.
Click clack. And don't y'all forget it. Folks, we will holler at y'all tomorrow. Have a great rest of your evening. See you. Bye.
Okay, great.